Hey, what's happening, everybody? Pragmatic Addict here. So before I get into this review, I do want to make a note of this because I did not do this when I hit 200 subscribers. I had too much shit going on, or I just, forgot about it. But we have hit 300 subscribers on the channel. And I know that every fucking YouTuber says thank you over like every milestone, and that it's, something that, again, just everybody does. And obviously, this is not a huge milestone. This is just, 300. I am still a small YouTuber. But I do want to say, as somebody who has, no fucking faith in myself, I do want to say thank you to everybody. I love talking with you guys. I love the fact that you guys keep coming back for whatever fucking reason to hear me babble about bullshit. And I just gotta say, guys, I'm having a blast talking with you guys every single day. I'm having a blast getting to know you guys. I'm super thankful that you, of all people, are coming and, supporting the channel, because I have thankfully not had too much drama or issues with people in the comments or people just hating on me. So that's also just huge bonus. So hopefully you guys keep coming back. Super appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's talk about VHS 99. So I will say that before I went into this movie, I didn't even see the trailer for this film, but I have seen every entry. And if you are unfamiliar with this series, the VHS franchise, it is basically a found footage anthology series with each segment, each story being helmed by a different director. And generally each background or lore, behind all the tapes, how they all, intertwine, and just the setting of the movie itself, of the movies themselves, they are usually very dark, very cryptic, very just, mysterious, and again, found footage and horror-esque. Usually, whether it, has something to do with people breaking into a house and just finding all these scattered videotapes, and the house that they're in just happens to be a fucking murder scene, or just horrible people just filming shit, again, just found footage, something found footage-esque, and they just stumble upon, again, just a variety of videotapes that are all fucked up, and as they watch them, horrible shit just keeps happening, something of that nature. This is the fifth entry now in the franchise, and I will say that as the franchise has gone on, I'd say probably about the third film or so, I've admittedly gotten less and less, interested, less and less, involved. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is that, so this fifth film, VHS 99, it does take place in the 90s, as did the last entry in the franchise, VHS 94, which, like this, was produced by Shudder. It was also at a Fantastic Fest. This film, VHS 99, was at a Fantastic Fest this year. They had all kinds of successful horrors such as Terrifier 2, Smile, Hellraiser, Werewolf by Night, just, to name a few. But the last entry, while it is also taking place in the 90s and 94, it was the most successful one in the entire bunch. So with me not knowing anything about this film, not seeing any trailers, I was that much more excited about it. Also, another thing, last thing I swear to God, before I actually get into this review, that I do want to mention is that while this film was shot, a sixth film was actually shot back-to-back, titled VHS 85, which has, been slated for next year. This has become an annual kind of thing at this point for the series. And this next entry, VHS 85, it was actually revealed that it would have, directors such as David Bruckner, I believe it is, who actually directed the new Hellraiser movie, as well as Scott Derrickson, who has helmed horrors such as The Black Phone and Sinister. So depending on how, I feel about this film, my excitement could actually just keep growing. So yes, guys, without further ado, let's actually get into this review of VHS 99. So what I want to mention right off the bat is the aesthetic here. And I'm not going to say of the movie, the aesthetic of the movie, because as I've learned with these VHS films, each, segment or tape can just vastly change. But with all these, again, being set in the 90s, it really did feel like that. Everything from the environment to even the presentation of the film itself. And what I mean by presentation is that, we're now 5 entries into this, series. And I will say that this one obviously, not only felt different for obvious reasons, but it felt very passionate, where it doesn't just feel like, a found footage film. It actually feels like just a compilation of just creepy ass shit that was captured in that, era, in that time. But I will say this, with all that I was initially like hyped for, or like all that I initially respected, with this intro, again, the world that we see, first off, with this film, that being the 90s settings, with all the references and, the dialogue and even like the blend of like horror and humor that we see even just like right off the bat, it felt like that. Like I respected it. But I will say, one thing that I've always been, interested and curious about with these VHS, films is, again, the setting in which all the segments, reside. And I will say that, for a film in this franchise that, takes place in this series, I was actually pretty disappointed as it kind of went on, at least with this intro, because, this isn't a new thing. Again, with 94 being the most successful, series in the franchise, it makes sense that they would try and expand on that, kind of a format a little bit more. But I will say that with this intro, it didn't feel like they had a real, like, grasp or a focus on, what they were going with. Which is, pretty disappointing, because I will say that, whether it's good or bad, like the intros of this series, whether they, work or not, they are memorable in their own degree, whether it's, very just, uncomfortable or fucked up shit happening, or it really does work just as a horror setup, with the past VHS films that I've seen, if it isn't the segments, it's the, again, movies setup and surroundings, residing all of that. They are memorable to whatever degree for what they are. And, what really sucks is that, as a big fan of the 90s, I think that the 90s is, one of my favorite, times. And I will say that, like, as somebody that was really excited for this movie, heavily because of that, I was disappointed because I didn't care about it. This was, one of those anthology films where I just wanted to see the segments. I wasn't vibing with really any of the characters. I wasn't vibing with, even whatever setup they had going forward. This is kind of interesting because the setup of this film, it isn't like the other VHS films where, the setup leads into the first film in a vastly, different way, where it's just, there is the setup and then there's the 5 stories and they're all completely different from each other. This setup, it is a setup, but it actually leads into the first segment. And I actually didn't know if this was the first segment, up until like the end of the movie, where I was like, okay, well, it said that there's 5 segments. Oh yeah, that was the first. and that's one thing, is that, like, I didn't know that, if this was the first segment or not. It didn't feel like there was as big of a setup. Again, it just didn't feel like there was a real idea or a real grasp on that. So that was pretty disappointing to me. But I will say this now, as this setup does lean into, the first segment and really, we get the thick of that, I did have fun with it as a 90s fan because, it does feel like, at least like aesthetic wise, it has no, relation or any comparison to this, kind of nature, which is funny that I'm mentioning it, but as a 90s fan, I kind of got vibes of like the Nightmare Room, or even like something of like R.L. Stine, just, obviously an R-rated film on Shudder. It had this haunted house aesthetic. As far as like, a setup for like, like within, the VHS franchise, like as far as like, an actual first segment goes, I do think that it felt that like that, and it fit that kind of category and that vibe, well enough. I just feel like, it worked enough for what it was overall aimed at. But I will say it did go down a lot of routes that were just like overall just a mixed bag for me. It's long, it drags on, and it is pretty all over the place. But I will say that, as far as like a setup goes, leaning into the first segment, as far as like, the VHS franchise goes, in that sake, and with this being, a 90s, theme, I still do think that it did, okay with. I think that as far as, what I wanted or expected to gain out of, it at this instant, I think it did, overall fine with that. Up to this point, I was still really excited for the rest of the movie because this segment isn't bad. It's not anything that's, catchy or like, is really like extremely memorable. But again, as a 90s fan, I did have fun with it. But getting into the second segment now, which, this is again, obviously, like all these, segments. This is the main theme around him. This does have a very 90s feel, where it actually takes place at a college campus. And we're basically introduced to a girl who is recording herself, and she's kind of like, described as like an outcast, but she's basically recording herself, sending a message to a specific sorority that she wants to get into. And we soon realize that this is actually a suicide bid, which I'm not extremely familiar with, but from what I grasped is that a suicide bid, at least in the, sorority kind of, fashion, is basically where you only want to be in one specific sorority, and it is called suicide bid because if it turns out that you don't get accepted into that sorority, you are pretty much screwed. And this segment gets, going pretty immediate. Right after this, intro of this girl recording herself, we actually are just jumped to this girl now with the sorority that she wants to get into. And obviously, there is someone who is recording the entire thing. But they're basically telling her about an urban legend called Guillotine, which is where 20 years ago at this campus, there was a girl who was trying to get into the sorority that this girl is now getting into, the same sorority. And basically, as a pledge, in order to get in, she had to stay, overnight in a coffin buried in the ground. And what ended up happening is that she was left there for over a week, and when someone finally got word of it and they tracked down the coffin, her body was not there. So that is all they know up to this point. They don't know what happened to her remains or what happened to the girl or whatever. This is just urban legend, something fucked up that happened at this sorority. And I'm not going to spoil, anything, further than this. I'm not going to spoil any more of the segment, but I will say that you do get like some pretty cliche writing like right off the bat, which weirdly enough I was actually not too against because it kind of worked for, again, like a 90s teen sorority feel. I expected the bad writing to be there, and if it wasn't, I kind of, it probably would have felt even more out of place. But, like, you get this, like, for example, like, one of the, like, the lead of, like, the sorority being like, oh, we saw your message. It was so heartfelt. And they're, like, quoting it where, like, this girl who's, like, the victim is, doesn't seem to take any, notice to, like, the fact that they're just mimicking her. But it basically establishes, like, pretty typical, as cliche as it honestly could, that these girls are up to no good. And, up to this point, I was like, okay, well, like, I've seen this before, this whole urban legend, like, 90s, college girls pranking this one outcast girl and shit goes horribly wrong. I was like, I've seen this shit before, this feels familiar. But even in saying all this, I was actually pretty on board with it because, as like the urban legend vibe, I wanted to see, where this was going to go. Again, this felt pretty familiar, but while there isn't too much like originality, right offhand, and even like things that are like portrayed and displayed, I don't think that, they're done in the most like, grabbing way. As far as like certain fears that it's like actually trying to focus on, mainly, it's not like it holds back on those or anything. There are even, a few gags that, horror fans will really appreciate. There's one that, when I actually saw like the more like centerpiece of horror, it actually had my attention. And there are even like, there is even like a specific like gross out gag that I'm still trying to brush off. And it's not that it's, extreme or anything, but it's just, it's a certain fear that I have. The biggest fear that I have is related to this gag. So that, obviously had an effect on me, which was, successful. And this is the interesting part, is that up until the end of this gag, while, I was having like majority of the, segment, this thought of like, well, that wasn't needed. That wasn't necessary. That wasn't, too over the top or original. How it actually wraps up, I will say, it was surprising enough, and it did actually stick the landing in a catchy and twisty enough, way. But going on to the next segment now, this one, I will say, it doesn't feel so much as a tale at first, because this actually does take place over the course of like an episode on a game show. You know, just like at first anyway, I did not really like this one at all. I just wasn't caring for it. A lot of these the segments in this, you know, film, they do take a while to get going. I think there are even a few of them that are like maybe around like the 20 to 30 minute mark, and maybe like 10-15 minutes of that at least is just setup. With this one, again, for, you know, a lot of it, it was really losing me. I just wasn't feeling it. Just the entire vibe of it, it just was not my thing. Again, it didn't feel like an exact like story or tale like the other VHS segments. Like, I'd say like up to the point of like where the most memorable thing I got from it up to this point was just the shitty 90s references. There's like, you know, certain aesthetics and like certain like, you know, quotes that are from like pop culture references or like just for a nostalgic feel, and I'm like, okay, I get it, feels kind of forced, but like at least I'm picking up on that. But I will say there is a point in this segment where shit just goes fucking batshit. Like it gets fucking wild. And actually, weirdly enough, it made me want to go back to the beginning of the segment and just rewatch it up to that point to just, you know, like I was at a point where I'm like, okay, now that we're here, I kind of want to go back and maybe actually try and give a shit more. Because I will say, this segment goes to some really, again, it just goes to batshit lengths. Now, I will say this. While I was actually, you know, again, at this point, now interested in what was actually, you know, being told as far as like the story in the segment goes, it feels way too bizarre for its own good, and it feels like it has way more, you know, like way too much crammed in for its own good as well. Like, it feels like a fair idea, like on paper, like a good concept idea, but it needed to be much longer in order to work. Again, it feels like it was a good idea, but it should have been much longer than just, you know, a segment or a short. It seems like, you know, like it just felt like there should have been much more lore and backstory, much more, you know, character development on both sides of, you know, the character sides in this segment. And again, it just feels like it was like way too excessive and way too crammed for its own good. And a lot of this, you know, segment does feel like it is mainly just for the, like, you know, grab of like shock value. Like, it feels like its main thing was just gross out humor more than anything. But I will say, it did have an interesting premise to it. Again, I just wish it had, you know, more freedom to make a more concrete story. Now, this next segment, the first thing I'm gonna say right off the bat is that this one really tries to just shove the 90s aesthetic down its viewers' throats, man. Holy shit. You know, don't get me wrong, the aesthetic is there, you know, sometimes in more times than others, but in saying that, there is just so many pop culture references and so many quotes that I'm just like, look, we get it. You're in the fucking 90s. Like, a lot of this aesthetic and a lot of these characters and even just like the way that they felt, the way that they talked, just the shit surrounding this whole segment, it just felt very forced in that 90s fashion. But in saying this, I was actually like more excited for this segment than really any other one, because what I liked about it is that for the majority of, like, I'd say like maybe half the episode, a lot of it is not only just setup, but the like what it's leaning into. You can tell that it's going down a specific route, but you don't know what that is yet. The segment does really well with just setting up a story where it is actually not just like, you know, setting shit up and just like making you feel like you're like could be getting more horror, more, you know, scare, and it's just wasting that. Like, it actually feels like it's actually trying to flesh something out and really does feel like a little mini movie. And what I will say is that, you know, well, again, a lot of this story, like for the first few minutes, I was like, well, what is the actual segment here? What is it about? And what this segment is basically about is that in its setup, it shows a group of teen boys, and they are, again, like I said earlier, how it's very just trying to slam the 90s down its viewers' throat. It's like that with these group of boys too. They're just your typical rebellious, troublesome, teenage 90s shit-stained boys. And all I will say without spoiling anything is that in one of the boys' neighborhoods, across the street from them, a very attractive girl moves in, and all these boys are just drooling over her. They're like, camping in the fucking kids' like room all night, and like one of them even like goes over there and like sets up equipment so that they can like spy on her. Just troublesome 90s boys bullshit. And what I liked about this is that this girl, they kept her so cryptic and so mysterious. There's not much background about her. They don't even reveal too much of like what she really looks like. It's just this group of friends just, camping in one of their houses, just spying on her and trying to figure out shit about her. And I gotta say, that was actually like the fun part of the segment, because it was like, regardless of how much like I hated these characters, the segment did do well with just fleshing out their story, with just, making them the centerpiece as far as characters go, and really letting us, see what they're about and see things, from their perspective. And I gotta say, it made, the mystery of this girl, that, like how cryptic her character was, it did that really well, because we know, coming from a VHS film, franchise film, and with this being, a horror franchise and this just being little segments, it was like, okay, something is up with that girl, but we didn't know what the hell it was. But we just knew something was up. And what I will say, which is another good detail, is that, like, once we're actually in the area of, like, where the horror is revealed, like, I was on board with it. I thought the pacing was good. I thought that even, like, the effects, like, initially, like, showcasing the real horror in this segment, I thought it was pretty well done. I would actually go as far as to say that, like, up to this point, it was, like, one of, like, the big, like, contenders of, like, being, like, one of the best segments in the VHS franchise. But now I will say this, is that, like, once it gets to the end, I do think it just falls flat, like, to the point where I was just kind of like, okay, well, there was really no ending to me. I mean, I didn't care about it. And even, like, the horror that it displays with this, conclusion, this climax, it just didn't really work for me. And I will say this is by far the shortest segment, or at least it felt like that. Maybe it was just because this is the one I enjoyed the most, but it just felt very fucking short. Again, the ending just seemed to kind of be non-existent, just very just flat and just careless to me. But now, going into the final segment, so this one actually takes place on New Year's Eve, right before the year 2000. And we see a ritual that is about to take place, where basically a woman is just sacrificed to a god. I know that sounds very just brief, but I'm just going to flat out say it. This one did not really do anything for me. The intro, I think that it's interesting. I think that the actress in this specific intro for this segment was really good. We see this girl who's like being like interviewed, and she's basically saying why, she thinks that she would be like a good sacrifice, like a good vessel, to be part of the ritual. And like what I liked is that she seems very innocent in all the right ways. It's gonna sound bad, but she seems very like kind of like innocent and just kind of like dumbfounded and just kind of easy to take advantage of in, the sense of like a horror story, for like a ritual. And I just thought that was, a good setup to this, segment. But I will say this, and, this can go either way with people, however you want to take it, but shit starts very fucking fast. Like, shit starts immediately after the scene I'm describing. Like, to the point where I actually had to rewind this segment a few times, because I was like, okay, wait, it's going too fast. I want to make sure that I'm on track. Knowing that this is, the final segment, the fifth one, I was like, well, I want to see where this actually, goes. And I want to make sure that I'm on track the whole time. And another thing that, I think people will be, happy to hear is that, even the horror, it takes off very fast. And I will say that as far as like horror goes, like, as far as like being in one segment, this one has the most of it. There are some, neat set pieces that caught my eye kind of like right away. But I will say, as a story, again, it moves very fucking fast. And even, the characters and, the shit surrounding it, it had potential here and there. But I will just say, and this is going to be just like, again, very cut to the chase, but this one just simply did not do anything for me. And, going forward with that, with this being the final segment in the film, that made me even more disappointed. Just as this franchise goes on, the more I feel it's just falling into that category of like annual release for a horror series. And not just because of the actual yearly releases, but just the feel of that too. There is potential, and in that potential, genuine creativity that could go places, and honestly, all of the segments here. But there just isn't that room to flesh it out to its fullest. Overall, I'm going to give VHS 99 at least a 2.2 out of 10 with an overall mixed review. And yes, I'm not going to talk about, the whole ending of the movie, because I will say, like, there is, a setup and, like, just, like, a surrounding, outside of all the segments, but it's nothing as, like, involved or as, like, memorable or as even really, like, story-driven as the other films. But yes, guys, that is going to do it for my review of VHS 99. This was a very weird review to do. I've never reviewed an anthology film before on the channel, so it's kind of like reviewing like 5 different episodes, but also like in just one movie. But yes, guys, that is going to do it for my review of VHS 99. Let me know what you guys thought about the review as well as the movie down below. What do you guys think of the VHS franchise? What is your guys' favorite movie of the franchise? With all that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, thank you so much for the 300 subscribers. I hope to see you guys very soon. I will be seeing you later this week with either Run, Sweetheart, Run, Pray for the Devil, or Wendell and Wild. There is a few films coming out. I don't know which one I'm going to get to first, but I will be seeing you guys later this week. So with all that being said, guys, I hope you guys are having a great night. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe, guys.